Before I call the Honourable Member for Macquarie, I remind the House that this is the Honourable Member's first speech, and I ask the House to extend her the usual courtesies. The question is that the address be agreed to, and I call the Honourable Member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. 30 years ago, I was a young journalist, inexperienced, working for 2UE, perched in the press gallery of the old Parliament House, in my first full-time job looking down on the 34th Parliament. If you'd said to me then, "You'll be one of those MPs one day," I can absolutely guarantee I would have used very unparliamentary language and rejected the possibility outright. I'd seen the pressures, the scrutiny and the challenges of being in Parliament, and I couldn't think why you'd want it. Yet here I am, not so young, with much greater life experience, and no one could be more proud or feel more fortunate than me to be in this privileged position. What I hadn't seen then, and what you rarely see from that gallery, is the journey a person's life takes that leaves them with no choice other than to run for office. I acknowledge that I stand on the traditional lands today of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people and pay respects to elders past and present. I extend that respect to the Darug and Gundungurra, the people who've cared for my part of the world, the Blue Mountains and the Hawkesbury, for more than 40,000 years. The 4,300 square metres of land I represent is geographically spectacular and dangerous. World Heritage mountains of sandstone escarpments and gum trees that can ignite with heat and wind. A sweeping river whose waters at times engulf the surrounding plains. I represent villages from St Albans, Mount Wilson and Mount Victoria through to the towns of Glenbrook and Richmond, the rural areas of Bilpin and East Kurrajong, the wilderness of Colo Heights and the suburbs of Mount Riverview and Bligh Park. In no other so-called Western Sydney seat does it take 3 hours to drive from one end of the electorate to the other, with ferries required to cross rivers along the way. Historically, the early European settlers were in awe of both these mountains and this river. By the time Governor Lachlan Macquarie, after whom the seat is named, established the towns of Windsor and Wilberforce, amongst others, this was a thriving colonial settlement. The early goat track across the mountains, that is now a much improved Great Western Highway, thanks largely to the efforts of one of my predecessors, Bob Debus, supports the transport of 2 million visitors a year to see the Three Sisters and experience the uniqueness of the Blue Mountains. Mr Deputy Speaker, the limitations that nature places on growth throughout my electorate of Macquarie means we have to be clever. In addition to tourism, we have our Richmond campus of Western Sydney University and our TAFEs, and they need to stay strong, accessible and be able to cater to local business and student needs. We have the Glenbrook and Richmond RAF bases. We have orchards, farms, market gardens and horse breeding. We have manufacturing and an extraordinary community services sector. And across these industries and more, we have a thriving culture of small business and self-employment, from sparkies to artists, writers to builders, self-motivated people who hit the road early to get to a job or jump on a pre-dawn train and watch the sun rise as they snake down the mountains. For that reason, I'm pleased that small business is in my genes. I grew up in my family's news agency in Sydney. My country-born parents were ambitious to provide for their children. The bank teller turned accountant and the public school music teacher did what many people still have to do to get capital, given we're one of the few OECD countries not to have some sort of government-supported finance for small business. They sold our home to buy their shop. These were parents who modelled hard work, 3:30 a.m. starts, 7 days a week, with Good Friday and Christmas Day the only 2 days off a year. There's nothing quite like the experience of being a car-sick 12-year-old at 6 a.m. on a Sunday morning in a van, the smell of newsprint surrounding you, freezing cold because one door is off the side of the vehicle, so your dad can throw the papers onto front lawns as you read out Telly to 26, Herald to 30, Herald to 32. Sadly, an experience the current generation has been deprived of thanks to digital media. Well, Mum and Dad, as it turns out, this news agency life proved the perfect grounding for every stage of my professional life. Working on a breakfast radio show, being a journalist doing doorstops outside Parliament, a foreign correspondent on a different time zone to Australia, a long-time commuter and a city fringe politician with 5:30 a.m. railway starts, no big shock to my system. For me, selling papers wasn't the calling. Journalism was my choice, but only after an amazing year as a 17-year-old Rotary Exchange student to Mexico that opened my eyes to the world and to the challenges of inequality and discrimination in a way my 7 public schools had not. When I first came to this place, I unexpectedly found myself the youngest permanent journalist in the press gallery at the start of the second Hawke term in January 1985. Whatever nerves I feel in speaking today were eclipsed back then by the fear of asking a stupid question of Paul Keating, Peter Walsh or Gareth Evans in front of reporters like Alan Ramsey and Laurie Oakes. What a lot I learned about policy, politics and politicians. It's been an honour to have had support over the last 7 years from 3 key figures of that era, Bob Hawke, Paul Keating and Neil Blewett, and such a privilege to be Neil and his partner Robert's local member. I covered the 1987 election campaign with both party leaders, a long winter campaign, and oh, how I want to ask forgiveness from the marginal seat candidates we visited, who, in my radio reports, I barely mentioned. I know now the efforts you were putting in a long way from Canberra and that your work didn't stop when you disappeared from our sight in between sittings. Only months before this wonderful building was opened, my husband and I moved from Canberra to New York and then to London as foreign correspondents. Mr Deputy Speaker, 3 years later, we were back in Australia. The Blue Mountains became our home. It beckoned because of the big blue skies, the clean air and the lower house prices. Alongside a motivating business partner, Jane Jordan, I started teaching people how to do media interviews. I had crossed to the dark side and become a media trainer. From Sydney to Darwin, working across a wide range of industry sectors, government agencies and not-for-profits, I had a job that was different every day, intellectually challenging and professionally rewarding. And that's where the story could have ended. A contented life raising 2 children, operating a growing business and enjoying the commuting lifestyle the mountains offers, with the luxury of dissecting federal politics from afar. However, John Howard's regime, while benign to many, stirred me into action. I couldn't sit by and see Australia becoming a backwards-looking and defensive society. Apparently, we no longer cared about being a republic or about Aboriginal reconciliation. We moved away from inclusion and we distanced ourselves from Asia. That was not the Australia I wanted for my children. So I joined the Labor Party, with no clear ambition other than to help get rid of John Howard. Not a bad one. Then, a decade ago, our family's foundations were rocked by our daughter's first experience of mental illness. I vividly remember a distressing night standing in my kitchen with my husband asking, "How do other families do this?" And while I didn't then and there declare my intention to run for Parliament, that was a moment I look back on as transformative, when something in me shifted. It turned out we weren't the only ones facing the same challenge. Having mental illness in a family makes you question your parenting and your values, and I've learned more from that experience than any other in my life. I'm proud that my daughter Phoebe is here today, determined that her history is something not to be ashamed of, but standing tall, knowing she has had the resilience and the strength to battle through some really difficult times. I'm equally proud of her brother Harry, sitting right alongside her, who, like many children in families where illness or disability strikes, has had his empathy and caring genes well and truly developed. So that was how I became someone who didn't just sit around solving the problems of the world at a dinner party, but an advocate and an activist. There is rarely a function I attend where people do not raise with me the issue of mental health, whether it's veterans in my electorate or the relatives of serving defence personnel, whether it's those caring for the elderly, whether it's mums struggling to know what's best for their anxious and self-harming child. This is something we have not yet got right. People who struggle with mental health and the friends, families and carers who support them need better tools and better support structures. It saddens me that we exacerbate the mental suffering of another group of people, people already fleeing from unimaginably fearful circumstances, by abandoning them to indefinite detention. We are responsible and will be held to account for the additional damage that we are doing, and this parliament must find a better way. And I worry about the mental health impacts if this government proceeds down the path of a plebiscite on same-sex marriage, which is an open invitation for harmful things to be said and done. As Amber Jacobus, an ASU member, someone who's volunteered on my campaigns and grew up in my electorate with her two mums, says, a plebiscite scares me. I think about the kids like me who will be made to feel ashamed because they will be told their family is worth less. Mr Deputy Speaker, the funny thing about standing up on an issue is that once you start, it's hard to stop. Injustice is injustice, no matter what form it takes. And to see schools starved of funding made it easy for me as a PNC president to want to promote the wisdom of Gonski, and more recently to stand alongside so many of my local teachers, members of the Teachers Federation and the AEU to make it a key election issue. The result shows very clearly that Macquarie wants Gonski. It makes it easy for me to fight for a full fibre broadband service for parts of my electorate that are currently facing the prospect of a second-rate service, which doesn't meet the needs of the home-based creatives and businesses that thrive in our region and may be forced to go elsewhere. It makes it easy for me to fight to protect the World Heritage areas of the Blue Mountains and the people who choose to live there from the consequences of climate change and from the impacts of a second Sydney airport, which is planned to operate above our skies 24 hours a day and night. And it makes it easy for me to want to fight to improve the travel times for Hawkesbury residents by advocating for a third crossing of the river, and in doing so, preserve the oldest surviving public square in the country in Windsor, older than Port Arthur and still occupied. The buildings that make up the George and Thompson Square is where the Australian concept of a fair go was enshrined in the naming of this square not after a king or a lord, but a reformed convict. It is so easy for me to fight for secure employment and workers' rights, dignity for people who are aged or unemployed, for the ABC and the arts, for renewable energy, for quality early childhood education and the full rollout of the NDIS, for women's reproductive rights and same-sex marriage. These are fights worth having. And as I've demonstrated time and time again, like my Windsor Wolves footy team, I am not one to give up. Mr Deputy Speaker, my community in the Blue Mountains had a fight on its hand in October 2013. That year wasn't one of my favourites. I turned 50, lost an election, and my house burnt down. Nearly 200 homes were destroyed by 2 fires on the same day in Mount Victoria and in Winmalee, the worst natural disasters in Blue Mountains history. As a community, though, we considered ourselves lucky. No lives were lost. But our suburban streets were like something out of a war zone. Personally, we were lucky. As a 19-year-old, Harry was home and able to save not just the cat, his favourite bass guitar and a couple of laptops, but also precious photo albums before the home we'd built and lived in for 22 years went up in smoke. Others were not able to recover anything. What stunned us as a community was a government changing the rules while fires still raged to reduce the number of people eligible for emergency payments. What also stunned us within 48 hours of the fire was the realisation that most people were seriously, unintentionally underinsured and that they would not be able to rebuild the home that they had. 3 years on, blocks of land still lie vacant because the gap between the insurance payout and the new rebuild costs is too wide. The codes brought in after the 2003 Canberra fires means that construction in bushfire-prone areas can be $50,000 to $200,000 higher. Insurers know that. Most of us realised it after our homes had burned down. And if we don't address this situation, every town or suburb hit by bushfire will have exactly the same experience as the Blue Mountains, as we're seeing now on the Great Ocean Road. People are then forced to make the heartbreaking decision not to rebuild, and the painfully slow road to recovery for a community after a bushfire will be much slower and much more painful. But as locals put it, you can't scare me. I'm from Winmalee. We are not easily dismissed, and I'm pleased that this year the member for Isaacs, in his role as Shadow Attorney-General, recognised that the insurance industry and government could work more closely in ensuring homeowners are better informed about the actual rebuild costs they face. Insurers may try to place the responsibility at local government's feet, but they take the premiums, they send the assessors out, and they are the ones who need to be part of the solution. Mr Deputy Speaker, as the member for Macquarie, I walk in the footsteps of many great Labor MPs. I'm the 15th person to be the member for Macquarie. 2 of my predecessors are Bob Debus and the late Maggie Deem, and I drew inspiration from them both. Maggie Deem as the first female member for Macquarie from 1993 to 96, and Bob Debus, our long-standing state MP and Minister for Everything, before becoming the federal member and a minister in 2007 in this place, who so effectively secured funding for his electorates, and without whom we would not have World Heritage listing of our remarkable Greater Blue Mountains. Mr Speaker, Macquarie was also Ben Chifley's seat, and that feels like really big shoes to fill. I take pleasure in knowing that, like me, it took Ben Chifley several goes before he became a Member of Parliament. Like me, he played the violin. And like me, he enjoyed a good crime novel and a cup of tea. Many of the battles I'll be fighting here are variations of the issues Chifley faced. He established the organisation that's become Australian Hearing, which we know should be kept in public hands. He funded theatre because he saw the arts as essential in a healthy society. He ensured people had access to medicines and public hospitals so that no charge was made to the patient, an early version of what we would call Medicare. The social security system was established so that there was a level below which, according to Chifley, no one should be permitted to fall, and without waiting for anyone first to fall a victim to destitution and grievous distress. Mr Speaker, what does it say about us that the other side has already introduced legislation in this term of parliament that will take us back to a pre-Chifley mentality? Chifley's Snowy Mountain scheme was a visionary infrastructure project of which our NBN plan is a descendant. The banking sector was a key priority, and Chifley increased funding for the CSIRO, medical research and university research. His words are even more true today than when he spoke them in 1949. We live in a scientific age, and money spent on research is a necessity for the maintenance of our standard of living and even for our survival. It's a lovely symmetry that the night I decided to run for pre-selection for Macquarie was at the Light on the Hill dinner at Bathurst, honouring Chifley, surrounded by comrades from Mackellar, Macquarie and beyond. Perhaps, Mr Speaker, the member for Lilly, who was the guest speaker at the 2009 dinner, had a role in it, as he discussed Chifley's Light on the Hill phrase as embodying the hope that a better society is possible and the duty we all have to create it. I want to thank Mark Andrews for the conversation that started the ball rolling and for the 7 years of quiet, unfailing support since then. And Luke Foley, who, a few days later, didn't laugh at the idea. And every one of my Macquarie branch members who pre-selected me not just once, but 3 times. Senator Doug Cameron, now my constituent, deserves a particular mention because, along with his staff, he has in many ways been a de facto member for Macquarie for years, and I wouldn't be here without him and his team. Doug's support was crucial in ensuring the smooth delivery of every one of our 2010 election promises, from the construction of the Springwood Hub and Glenbrook National Park upgrades to the new Wolves Grandstand and road improvements for North Richmond. Member for Blue Mountains Trish Doyle, Hawkesbury councillor Barry Calvert and Blue Mountains Mayor Mark Greenhill and his Labor councillors. The part you've played over many years in fighting the Tories in our part of the world at different levels of government has made my task easier. Thank you. As has the ongoing support of the Macquarie FEC and my loyal comrades Vice President Susan Elfert and Secretary Peter Letts. To my campaign team and volunteers from 2010 and 2013, I would love to name you all, but if you got fed by Ron and you have a purple Susan T-shirt, you know you were there from the beginning. Equally, if you have a T-shirt that says, "I'm supporting Harry's mum," that one's a limited edition. Those in the public galleries who've travelled here to be here today and those who couldn't be here know that while I have loved every minute of it, my journey to this place has not been done lightly or easily. We are a grassroots campaign with hundreds of locals, and whether you wobbled or stood in the rain, the wind and the snow, or broke a limb, as 2 of my volunteers did, or sat on phones for hours on end, thank you for being part of it. If you stuck with me not through just one campaign, but 2 or more, like Susie and Moz, Brian, the Kims, Helen and Mike, Marie and Ian, Denise, Pete, Margaret and Brian, Tori, Chris and Jan, and my new staff, Madeline and Jack, I am humbled by your support. To my 2016 team, Mitch Wilson, Sebastian Henderson and the CPSU crew, Tom HB, Hawkesbury Campaign Coordinator Extraordinaire Leonie Wilbo, Rose Jackson, Kayla Manane and John Graham in party office, my Emily's List mentor Helen Westwood, and members of the ASU, the AMWU, United Voice, MUA, RTBU, FSU and CFMEU, and Sally McManus's ACTU's Secret Army, helped by the HSU and Nurses and Midwives, Blue Mountains Union Council and Penrith Valley Community Unions, thank you. When you live in an area that has big hills and long walks between driveways, you particularly appreciate the young women and men in young labour. Each generation has been amazing, and I hope a beer at the Macquarie Arms helped. Thank you. For my good friends, Anna Grutzner, Alison Reedy, Jenny Nethercote, Mark Carnegie, Phil Davey, Greg Hollins, Peter Primrose and Chris Neal, I'm grateful that you never gave up hope. And to all the other friends where I've missed gatherings and you've not made me feel guilty, or you've at least forgiven me, thanks, that made it a bit easier. And of course Ron, who would rather I didn't mention him at all, But without him, I wouldn't be standing here fed and ironed. To my wonderfully creative children, Phoebe and Harry, who didn't know what they were in for, but like my parents, Jan and Bob, who don't seem to mind if I'm just popping into their place for a quick change of clothes or to use the loo, they all accept how important this is to me. I want to thank my brother David, who's here today, and sister-in-law Sarah and their children Stella and Henry, who hopefully will be my constituents within a few months. And a shout out to my other brother Rob, who seems to think that the fact of living in Spain excuses him from handing out on election day. Virtually every member of the Labor frontbench, both in government and in opposition, has been out to my electorate more than once, and I'm pleased that I can now invite Bill, Tanya and the team to my part of the world as a member, not just a perennial candidate. Mr Deputy Speaker, it's taken 20 years for Labor to be once again entrusted with the responsibility of representing Macquarie with the current boundaries. That in itself is a humbling achievement, and I take the responsibility seriously. When I'm asked in years to come what I consider my greatest achievement as an MP to be, I promise there will be no hesitation. I can't predict now what that achievement might be, but what I do know, and what my electorate knows, and what this chamber will soon see, is that I will be tirelessly, resolutely, doggedly here to deliver for the people of Macquarie. Yeah.